During the early wild days of what is now NASCAR Winston Cup racing, 3 champions emerged who would help shape the future of the sport. Today on NASCAR Past Champions, we look at 3 very special early title holders, Red Byron, Bill Rexford, and Rex White. Next.
Red Byron, Bill Rexford, and Rex White, 3 early NASCAR champions, but very different men from varied backgrounds. Each of them would end up at the pinnacle of their sport of NASCAR, and each helped pave the way for today's superstars. Hi and welcome to NASCAR Past Champions. I'm Mike Joy. Byron was a World War II veteran. Rexford, a young hotshot from New York State. And White honed his racing skills delivering eggs as a youngster. Each helped mold the early days of NASCAR.
Raised near Taylorsville, North Carolina, Rex White overcame adversity as a child.
I lived in the country. I didn't have nobody to play with but horses and cows and fields to plow and things like that. Grew up on a farm. And when I had polio, I was falling down. I fall in the field where the plowed dirt was, and my dad thought I was doing it to try to get out of work. And of course, he kind of got on me. But when I got to falling down the steps, they thought something was wrong. They took me to the doctor and found out what it was.
Rex didn't let his battle with polio stop him from becoming interested in auto racing.
I worked in a gas station, and a guy come along with posters to put on Saturday night racing or Friday night racing, and he'd say, "Can I put this poster in your gas station window to advertise?" And I said, "Sure." So I looked at that sign for week after week, and I didn't have any money much, so I finally got money enough to go to a race. And the first race car I seen go around a racetrack, which was West Lanham, Maryland, I said I want to do that. I told my wife I'd like to do that, and I kept on till I did.
Having the desire to race and finding the means to do it in the late 40s were 2 very different things. But through perseverance, Rex found a way.
I took a board off the fence behind the pits and sneaked through there every Friday night and started helping another driver. And the boy got drafted in the Army that was helping him. He said, "You want to go racing with me?" He said, "Don't pay nothing, but I'll buy your eats." And I got started, and I learned an awful lot. His name is Frankie Schneider. He's won a lot of races. And that's who I worked with prior to my driving career.
It was 1951, and Rex had found a way to race. But it wouldn't be until 1955 that he moved up to Grand National racing.
I run 1955 around Bowman Gray Stadium in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Lynchburg, Virginia, and run the whole year, and went to Florida to race in the winter. And I got a call from Alvin Hawkins, which is a promoter at Bowman Gray Stadium. And he said, "I got a guy who wants you to drive a new car." And I said, "Well," he said, "would you drive it at Daytona?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll drive it." So I came up from Boynton Beach to Daytona for the race, and they took a car off the showroom floor. They took the hubcaps off of it. They put a roll bar right behind the seat, the bench seat, and a seat belt in it, and a number on it. And that was all that was done to that car.
With his appearance on Daytona's famous beach course, Rex White was on his way to making a name for himself in Grand National racing. Rex White's dreams had come true. He was now racing in the Grand National division of NASCAR. But Rex struggled while building his own race cars.
I built my first Sportsman, and I built it out of the junkyard. And you had to have tires and things that you couldn't overcome. So I worked and saved money to buy a good set of M&H racing tires and get a pretty good engine together, and cut a lot of corners on the race car. Everything come out of the junkyard, nothing new, not even a seat, not even a used seat belt. I did have a new helmet. One thing I did when I started racing, I bought a new helmet. I didn't want to use one, but it's pretty important your helmet is. But we went to a lot of races where when we signed in the pit gate with Mary and Johnny Bruner, the $2 that you had to buy a pit pass took all the money you had. And you had to win some money to go home. And it makes you race different.
As Rex began to make a name for himself, he went up against the giants of his day. Tiny Lund, Junior Johnson, Ned Jarrett. Only 5'4" tall, sometimes Rex was at a disadvantage.
You know, we could put him down in a car, you couldn't see nothing but the top of his head. But for his stature, is a short little guy because he had polio when he was a kid and it affected his legs. But he was sure enough man, he could drive a race car.
Rex was just a little guy. And I remember one of the things about Rex was some of the other guys like Tiny Lund and jokesters used to tell Rex that if he wanted them to, they'd put a high chair in his seat, you know, where he could reach the pedals. And they were always busting on Rex, but Rex sort of paid him back when he got on the racetrack because he won his share.
I think my size was a disadvantage because the cars were so hard to steer. It took a lot of physical strength to do it, and I had to prepare the car with less caster in the car in order to drive it 500 miles. 600 miles at Charlotte was tough. The last 100 was rough. But people like K.O. Yarborough and Tiny Lund, they'd crank the steering wheel completely off the car. It'll make it turn some way or another.
White's persistence paid off when Chevrolet began to show interest in his career.
I got a job driving for Chevrolet in '57, and that came from the '56. And in 1956 season, I run the car, worked on the car, built the car, did awful lot of the work, traveled, towed a lot of races by myself, run the race, pack up, go home. And I went to Flat Rock Speedway and met Maury Rose, and I got some factory help there. And then they invited me to come up and get hired at the end of the year on the Chevrolet team.
With backing from Chevy, Rex White put himself on course for a run at the Grand National Championship. Now armed with Chevrolet factory support, Rex White began to come into his own on the racetrack. He got his first win at Fayetteville, North Carolina in '58 and finished in the top 10 in championship points 2 out of 3 years between '57 and '59.
In '59, I got a '59 Chevrolet, went to Daytona, and I hooked up with Louis Clements. And he and I got together and we run the year in '59, won 4 or 5 races, run good, finished about 5th in points. So we got another 60 car, so we had 2 cars. And I wound up the 2 cars so I could run all the races, and we started chasing points, and next thing you know, we was up front and then run for points the rest of the year.
Along the way, Rex earned a reputation for smoothness.
Rex was so smooth. I mean, he would, you would think when they cross the car up, when they get down halfway down the straightaway and you turn the car sideways and get back in the gas, you think of someone doing that in a style like Curtis Turner, who people sort of epitomized as a wild man on dirt, that he would sling that thing around. But Rex White could do it, and it was so smooth. Rex would drive the car around the racetrack like it was in a slot. Same line every lap. Very, very consistent. And he and Ned Jarrett did have a great battle for the championship.
He was a different kind of race car driver. He specialized in short tracks like Martinsville, Bowman Gray, South Boston, and though you put him on a track like that and he was just almost unbeatable.
Come 1960, Rex had one goal in mind: winning the championship.
I think when Rex won his first major race on a major speedway, he won in Atlanta, Georgia. I think that was definitely the time that, oh yeah, we're going to go for the championship.
By the fall Charlotte race, Rex had amassed a huge point lead over Richard Petty and knew the title was in his reach.
Lee and Richard got a shortcut at Charlotte through the infield and the dog leg, and Johnny Bruner set him down for it, and I gained a lot of points there. I think they took all of Richards and Lee's points away for doing that, if I'm not mistaken, or a bunch of them. I forgot exactly how it was, but it was I had a big lead.
Rex ended up beating Petty by nearly 4,000 points to win the 1960 championship. A year later, Rex looked to defend his crowd against rival Ned Jarrett, and their duel was fun for fans to watch.
Rex and Ned, I thought, were both, it's great that they both won championships, I think, because they began to introduce into the sport the idea of the thinking man's champion. And Rex was a lot like Ned Jarrett in that he could keep the car up there, which again I keep talking about this, but that was no small feat, and it was just difficult on the racetrack quality of those times, and with the lack of engineering sophistication compared to today that those guys had to put up with or were limited to. It was hard to do that.
Well, they were both so good on dirt. And you know, on dirt, the car is literally out of control in the turns, and they would lean on each other. And it was always good, clean, hard racing. It was not, I mean, they would bang into each other and lean up against each other, and I mean, it was something to see. With two cars coming out of a corner sideways, either inches apart or actually together, and then see them straighten up on the straightaway and do it again. But they had a fierce, they had fun.
Well, any time that you put two talented race car drivers like those two together, well, you got a war going. Maybe it's not a shooting war, but it's a war. And one's going to try to outdo the other and whatever, and it's just, I think it's just a common deal.
Rex White had won the championship in 1960. Chevrolets were the best cars at that particular time, and he was the top guy with Chevrolet. And Rex White is the guy who got me with Chevrolet. They were looking around for a young driver that they could support, and this support back then was being done under the table because they had a truce of the manufacturers with each other that they would not openly participate in the sport. But Chevrolet was doing some things, and so they had Rex to ask they asked him who he would recommend, and he recommended me, and then they asked him to contact me and see what my interest might be. And the fact that I could get some factory support, of which I had none, borrowed money the first year in 1960 to really get started, and so I was desperate and really appreciated the opportunity to get some factory support, and Rex is the guy who helped me to do that. And then as it turned out, I beat him for the championship that year, but it was only because he had some tough luck, and I had better luck and was more consistent during the year.
Rex White had finally been crowned Grand National Champion, the first of the radical decade of the 60s. Rex White's biggest career win came in the Dixie 400 in the season-ending race at Atlanta.
The race I won there, they had a bump going into one. And Louis and I had been working on a shock absorber so we could get across that bump rather than drive above it. And basically the only thing we'd done during the race was we worked on that shock, and I qualified, and I sat there and run right up in front all day. And when we made our last pit stop, I knew I thought we was going to have to pit again. So I just sat there with Marvin, and I said, well, if you want to lead, fine, you know, you just go right ahead. And he run out, and I won the race.
It was Rex's 28th and final career win. He walked away from the sport after a frustrating 1963.
I got out of racing in '63 after Chevrolet dumped us again, and I just kind of got disgusted with it. I got a good job and working for an automobile dealership and a good person, and I just didn't get back in it, and then I got away from it and I didn't pursue it any longer. But I think if I would have stayed around racing, I would have probably got a ride or built another car, built formed another team. Louie and I broke up, and I run Sportsman in 1965 and run 32 races. I won 20 of them, and I think I finished second in about 10 of them. Only fell out of a couple races.
To all those little guys out there today, Rex White is a great example of a little guy being able to compete with a bunch of big guys, because in Rex White's day, there were no little guys. He was basically it.
Well, first he was a very short of stature guy, one of probably the shortest until Tom Pistone came along. But he was a quiet, calculating guy, very smart. You wouldn't say an opportunist, I mean that, but I mean that in a way, really, but I mean that in a way that he could size things up and pick out a, here's what I've got to do today. I may not have the best car, I may not be the best driver, if any of those competitors ever really think that way, but I think I've got what it takes today to go out and hang around until these three guys, let's see if they're there at the end, and then go out and get it done.
Rex White led NASCAR into its second decade of competition, but let's spin the calendar back 10 or so years. In 1950, Bill Rexford became NASCAR's second champion. At age 23, the New Yorker beat Lee Petty and defending title holder Red Byron for the championship when those two were punished for running in outlaw events. With one victory in 17 starts, 9 top 10s and 1 pole, Rexford edged out Fireball Roberts for the crown in the final race of the season. He thus became the youngest champion in NASCAR history, as well as the most controversial. Meanwhile, NASCAR's first champion was one tough driver. Red Byron came to the speedways straight from battle. He'd been a tail gunner on a World War II bomber.
Red was a good driver before the war. He went in service, as everybody did during World War II, and he was a tail gunner on a bomber and got shrapnel from a flak burst and pretty much tore up his leg. But he built a special stirrup to hold his leg in place while he drove. The picture of him sitting there covered in dirt, holding a canteen for the water, Army canteen. It was typical. It was a dirt track. You got hot and sweaty, and the dirt just stuck to you, especially all the red clay tracks that we ran. The interior and exterior of the cars were covered. The fans were covered. Everything. It was just, didn't know too much about calcium chloride at the time, but they used to wet the tracks, or some tracks put oil down. But it was typical of the day, and he was just one of the guys you had to beat every week, whether it was modified or later in the strictly stock division, it was called to start with.
Byron won NASCAR's first modified championship in '47 in a tight race with Fonty Flock. Went on to win the first modified race on Daytona Beach in 1948. And when NASCAR began what was then their strictly stock division, there was no doubt Red Byron would be a contender. Red Byron's success in the modified division carried over into Bill France's strictly stock division. Byron teamed up with legendary mechanic Red Vogt and team owner Raymond Parks for 1949. He won 2 races with the Oldsmobile Rocket 88.
Well, after the war, I met Red over at Red Vogt's garage. I never had seen him before then, and I was wanting to start with 2 new drivers. And so Red Byron was one of them, and Bob Plott was the other in 1946, right after the war. He didn't try to get out there and lead the race to start off with. He just kind of hold back, you know, till that last half, and then he would go start fighting for the front.
Those guys were just so good, and had they gained the knowledge that they had on the cars and the experience that they had driving those cars, whether they, as a kid, they, you know, ran in the fields and with a tractor or whatever it was, but in looking back, and from the first day that I started competing against them, they just seemed to have a natural feel for dirt. And it was some of the greatest shows I've ever seen put on dirt.
In the season finale at North Wilkesboro, Red's 16th place finish clinched the first ever NASCAR Strictly Stock title by 118 points over Lee Petty.
He had a heck of a car owner, Raymond Parks, and Red Boat, who was a crackerjack mechanic. That was what it was all about. And he finished the races on the beach. He was fast, and that's how he won the championship. I think he was the first one to win the championship for NASCAR. And that was what it was all about.
He had good equipment. He had Red Boat building his cars, owned by Raymond Parks. That combination of Parks and Boat had won the championship of NASCAR, the first championship in 1948, before there was what we now call Winston Cup. And that was with Fonnie Flock driving. So you have your guys who had that ability. They had the backing, they had the skill and talent mechanically, they had the talent for driving. Red Byron really came out after the war as one of the top drivers. I guess the experience of what he'd gone through during the Pacific campaign made him say, well, you know, I've gone through the war, so I can go out and have some fun, and he did have fun racing.
Nice fellow, quiet fellow, didn't have much to say. And he was a steady driver, and so he won the championship.
These three champions were among NASCAR's earliest stars. Byron's support of the sanctioning body helped NASCAR grow from its infancy when it needed a spokesperson. Rexford, at age 23, is still the youngest champion on the record books, even today. And the 1960 champ, Rex White, defined consistency, conserving his equipment in the wild early days of the sport to achieve the ultimate success. For NASCAR Past Champions, I'm Mike Joy. Thanks for joining us.